So where you going to tomorrow when I see that these are lies to come? Would you even care? And I feel it. And I feel it. Where you going to tomorrow? Where you going with the mask I found? Welcome to the greatness machine. Mr. Saqib. Oh, excuse me, I'm Saqib, right? I got that right? All right, sorry, I'm learning the names. A lot of names. So Saqib, you guys, welcome to the Greatness Machine. I'm your host, Darius Mirshahzadeh, and we have a very special guest with us today. We have Mr. Saqib Qureshi. Did I get that right?
Pretty much, yes.
Hello. You're welcome to correct me. My last name's long and scary, so I always like to get it right. So correct me. I want to make sure.
The first name is pronounced Saqib.
Saqib, excuse me. Saqib, and then Qureshi or Qureshi? All right, Saqib, thank you. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Thank you.
Is it the first time you've been serenaded on a live stream or podcast?
No, but I've never been introduced with a song before, so there you go.
Well, guys, we have a great special guest today and a great show. Before we get started, though, I do want to do a little bit of housekeeping. First of all, the format of the show is quite simple. The name of the show is Greatness Machine. We're all about people who are living their passions to create greatness in the world. And Saqib is no stranger to that. He's written a new book that we're going to be talking about here in just a moment. But before we go there, a couple of things about live streaming. We're live, so start a watch party, ask us questions. My team is on standby. They'll be sending the questions our way. And I'm really, really excited about this interview. So Saqib is coming on the show. And Saqib, I didn't tell you this, but I usually rewrite people's bios. But you had a lot going on. So I just said, I'm just going to take the bio as it stands and I'm going to read it. Is that cool? You go with that?
Absolutely.
All right. So Saqib is coming on the show to discuss his new book, The Broken Contract. And he's written for the Financial Times, The Independent, the Wall Street Journal, and the Spectator. And he's also the author of Reconstructing Strategy, Dancing with the God of Objectivity. And after decades of working in government management, consulting, and investment banking, and of experiencing the dysfunctionality of democracies, Saqib began a journey beyond the surface of our democracy. So welcome to the show, Saqib. I'm so excited to hear about this. So your new book, The Broken Contract, it came out 2 weeks ago. Congratulations, my friend.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So is your second or your third book?
Second.
Wow. And so how did this happen? How did you decide that I'm going to write about the broken contract? And tell us a little bit about the book.
Yeah, you know what? The kind of journey began, I think, like 4 or 5 years ago, where I began to make sense of the democracy that was around us here in Toronto, which is where I live. And I became aware that at one end we had very fair, transparent elections, so that was in place. But when I kind of thought about the word democracy, which is really about people rule, people power, I just couldn't help but feel that, we've got the voting, but this doesn't feel like the people own their government. It doesn't feel like the people are in control. And it does feel like the people who are running government seem to kind of think of themselves as the top of the totem pole, and they can ignore or subordinate the perspective of ordinary citizens. And the more I kind of engaged local government here, the more my eyes kind of opened up, and I began to draw the connections not only within one city, but across, municipal, state, federal government, and began to see all sorts of connections, which I hadn't seen before. But at the heart of it was this realization that, yes, our democracy has voting, but it's not really democracy. It's not really about people being in the driver's seat.
So, so I understand this from like an intellectual standpoint, but I guess from like a logic standpoint, if I vote and I don't understand, I know in the United States we have, we have popular vote and then we have electoral vote. If you're looking at the, presidential election here, we have some things around gerrymandering and, you have these congressional districts and whatnot. So there's some gamesmanship that happens down here. I'm not fully familiar with how it works in Toronto or in the entire country of Canada. So, but my belief is that if you pull away the gamesmanship, which I do believe affects some of what we're talking about here, at least in the United States, and you look at the idea of a democracy, a real democracy, compared to, let's say, what happened where I can't remember the country, where Belarus, where they just had their election, and it's clearly there's voting fraud happening in places. So like that's if we say there's a spectrum of fairness in a democracy, that's an unfairness, right? Yeah, they're a democracy, but my vote really doesn't count because there's voter fraud and whatnot. And then there's the other side of the spectrum, which we would hope would be places like Canada, Toronto, United States, where I live in Austin, Texas, where my vote counts because I get to make a choice. I make that vote, they add them up, and whoever gets the right number of votes wins, and I get to choose the winner. And that winner should be representing my interest. Keyword is should. So is the disconnect not so much in the choice, or is it maybe in the system by which that person goes into does not allow them to represent the voice of the people?
It's largely systemic, and I think it originates from, look, if you take the US as an example, in 2016 presidential and congressional elections, some $6-7 billion of marketing spend was shoved up, 200-300 million citizens for them to absorb. So you had this barrage, this fire hose of information, disinformation, and all things in between, which are pummeled upon citizens in a way that is close to impossible for the vast majority of citizens to get their heads around what is truth and what is not, and what is relevant and what is not. So they're just smacked silly. And within that marketing spend, you've got promises, you've got innuendos, you've got commitments, you've got quasi-promises, you've got things that feel like promises and commitment, but aren't quite because they're caveated. Now that happens, and then from there you elect one person, notwithstanding the fact that most people may not have voted. Okay, so but you elect one person. That person then goes away for 2, 4, 6 years. You have almost no visibility of what they have done. I mean, they can talk about it on their tweets, and they can advertise it on Facebook and social media and the pamphlets, but you have no independent verification of what they've done. Okay, you have no ability to remove them as a citizen. They come back to you in 2, 4, 6 years' time, and then they want your vote again. They hit you with another few $1 million of marketing spend, another few bits of information, disinformation, and everything in between. And then you realize, hang on a minute, if you were working for me in my job, sorry, my company, and you were gone for 2, 4, 6 years, and I had no independent verification as to what you did, on what basis am I going to give you a renewed super luxury contract with a terrific pension plan and high profile as well? Why would I do that? So if I wouldn't do it in my business, why am I doing it in my government, given that 40% of whatever I earn in one way or the other ends up in the government coffers? And so that made me think that, hang on a minute, this is the election cycle, and that doesn't even speak to the fact that 99.5% of our government is completely unelected. There is no election for them, and we can curve this with so many other bits and pieces. You have the party discipline, you've got the role of lobbyists, you've got the role of the media soundbite and all the rest of it. So you've really got to ask yourself, I'm electing one person with out of 100 or 200 people in government. That person is going to smack me silly with a phenomenal amount of information during the election cycle, but will be absent otherwise by and large. Okay? And I will have no visibility as to what they've actually accomplished. And what would be democracy to me would be us having a say in our tax spending. I mean, I find it amazing that American citizens are deeply upset that 30% of their federal taxes go up in foreign aid. In reality, it's less than 1%. So Americans are giving some 40% of their income into tax. They think a third of that tax is going to foreign aid. In fact, it's less than 1%. And of that 1%, a significant proportion is actually designed to help American exports and is actually quasi-political. So if you are so removed from the spending of your money, then what does that say about the spirit of democracy in the system that you are part of? And that to me was a kind of watershed moment. I thought, this doesn't make sense. We clearly have votes, but we don't have democracy. And from there, I realized that you can actually have a perfectly clean voting apparatus every 4 years or 2 years, whatever. You can have clean voting systems, but in essence, you do not have the spirit of democracy in your governance.
Interesting. So it's funny. I had a conversation like this about a week or two ago with a friend of mine, and you used a few words that I was like, we had the same conversation. You wrote a book about it, but I'm simply having the conversation, which is, I said, if any of these people worked for us, first of all, we're paying them. They work for us. They are in service to the citizens. On paper, you and I both know there's complete issues with that statement. Mm-hmm. But on paper and theoretically, the politicians work for us. We're the CEOs of the country. We're the citizens. They're on our payroll. To your point, we're paying them out of our tax dollars. And if they should be held accountable, and the word accountability, I just kept thinking, I thought the word accountability 10 times while you were talking. Where's the accountability? Where's the accountability? Where's the accountability? Where's the accountability? Because all I heard was marketing spend, get what you want, no accountability, go spend more money to market again, get what you want, no accountability, right? And so to your point, if this was an employee of mine and I'm the boss, I would never rehire that person, right? So to your point, I believe that it's a systemic issue. And I only, again, know it from the lens of the United States. I don't know. How is it in Canada? Is it the same there as far as you see?
It's very similar. I think the big difference with Canada is that there are spending limits on campaign donations.
Right.
Sorry, not spending limits, but there are donation limits. So me as a citizen out here, I can't donate more than $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 Canadian, that is, per year. Corporates can't donate a cent. And I know in the US, the Supreme Court has ruled that donating to political parties is part of freedom of expression. My pushback to that has been, yes, it is, but you do realize that you're destroying democracy in the process. You're giving people the right to express themselves, but inadvertently, you are also preventing or polluting or hindering people rule, because then what happens is that you've got a bunch of multimillionaires and billionaires who influence decision-making. I mean, all you have to do to be an ambassador in the United States is to write out a $20 million check, to the political party or to the president's campaign or to his opponent's campaign, and you will be an ambassador, irrespective of whether you're actually any good at that job or not. Okay, but the point being that you compromise democracy, I think, by having such vast sums of capital, which is quite a unique American problem, I think.
Yeah, and to your point, like that's cronyism. If I can buy a political seat, right? So or something that affects political behavior, right? Which a ambassador should be affecting political behavior, right? So, so I couldn't agree more. And the argument, I forgot how long. So if I'm running for, let's say the head of Canada, how long is that election cycle? I had heard it's significantly shorter than it is here.
It's 4 years. Typically 4 years.
Sorry, not for the actual position, but how long can you actually campaign for the upcoming term?
So there is a deadline date after which the campaign cycle begins. From memory, I'm thinking 6 months or 8 months, but I can't remember offhand.
Yeah, I had heard it was 6 months, and I said that's funny because here in the United States, people were campaigning for a year or two, right? Right. So I was making the argument. I said, well, so the issue you have here is you don't have term limits. I have people that come in for 4 years. They do their job for 2, kind of, if you want to call it that. Then they go and start campaigning for 2 years. They go start raising money for a year. They're campaigning for a year, rinse, wash, and repeat. And I said, that's broken. And I guess I want to say this because I come from a background as a CEO, entrepreneur, building high growth, high scalable, high accountability organizations. And in my experience, is that people behave based off the incentive systems we create for their behavior, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what I think is the issue, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is I believe the incentive system for candidates and for people that sit in politically appointed or politically, voted on positions, I think their incentive systems are broken. I think that they have no incentive to do their job. They only have an incentive to do what's best for them and to get reelected. And that may align and it may not align with the needs of the people. And so when you have a system that's a broken system around incentives, people are going to do what they're going to do. To your point, why should it, if the incentive system says, well, if you become a billionaire, Darius, you get to have a lot more say in what our country looks like. The incentive I'm creating is unadulterated capitalism at all costs so that I can have control to then dictate what our democracy looks like. And to your point, that is then not the voice of the people. So I think that the incentive systems are broken, and it has shifted power to those who have the means to create influence. And money has, and capital is how that's happening, at least from my perspective here in the United States. So what are your thoughts on some of these ideas?
No, in the current Congress, I think some 85% of senators and congressmen happen to have raised the most campaign funding for their election campaign. So not everybody who raises a lot of money wins a seat,
Right.
but 85% of the time, if you've raised the most in your constituency, you will be re-elected. And not only that, but incumbents have a massive fundraising advantage when it comes to raising election funding. I mean, but basically, they can go out there and promise the earth. They have visibility. People recognize them. They can pull strings. They can guarantee bits and pieces. So they have that kind of innate advantage. And you've got to ask yourself the question: what is the job of a representative? Why are we electing that person? And fundamentally, I think what we're doing, we are hoping to elect somebody who will advocate on our behalf. We don't want them manipulated by the whips. We don't want them feeding off lobbyists. We don't need them, kind of building their children's trust fund, okay, or their favorite charities, or the ideological slant that the mother-in-law has, but we want them to advocate for us. Okay? That advocacy work happens, but it is not top of the priority list. It's rare for it to be top of the priority list. And that's where I think we need to kind of align our thinking in terms of, okay, how do we get there? How do we get to that level where we can say with confidence that our representative, he's fundamentally focused on the things that are happening in his or her constituency. And one way to do that, for instance, and I say no reason why it can't be done, is to have every single representative's agenda available online. So maybe with the caveat of national security, I get that piece. I'm not 16 years old, but maybe there's a caveat there. But otherwise, their day-to-day agenda, purpose of the meeting, or what work they did, what was achieved. And if nothing was achieved, that's fine too, because as you and I both know, there are times where we're sat on our desk working away, we do our piece of work, and eventually we realize, you know what? That's a waste of 2 hours. That happens. Okay, but I'd rather see that. I'd rather know that. Okay, that was what was happening, than having no idea. And having no idea means that our representative, like you say, third year in, straight to the lobbyists, straight to the donors, straight to the marketing guys for the next campaign. Well, actually, dude, you were elected for 4 years or 6 years, okay? And nobody gave you the right to kind of spend 50% of that time playing Xbox and 50% of the time, running the next campaign. And so I don't see any good reason now why we can't have their calendars, their weekly, monthly calendars with who attended the meeting, what was achieved, what was the purpose at every single piece. And I can tell you, the people who will most resist this idea are the representatives themselves, which is ironic because they ought to be the fiercest advocates in theory, because they ought to be saying, look, I'm advocating on your behalf. But in reality, that's not what their job is about. And they don't want that out in the open.
Right. So what I'm hearing you say is transparency and attached with accountability is a simple fix. And just by simply saying, hey, I want to publish what these people are doing, right? What's on their calendar? Who are they meeting with? Why are they meeting with them? That, which to your point, I should, if I have an employee and I want to know what they're doing, I mean, I have one-on-one report. I have one-on-ones with them, and they go over what they've accomplished over the past week or 2 weeks or whatever, right? So how is this any different? I think it's a great idea. So in your book, it sounds like that's one of the ideas around fixing this broken contract. What other tell us more about the book? Like what is really the nexus from a solution standpoint to this broken promise around our voice being heard and counted by those that which we elect?
So the book's kind of core focus is about democracy, and I think really what I decided to do was to figure out, when we mean democracy and people's power, and we mean indirect democracy, what is it that we're actually seeking? And I think what we're seeking is accountability, representation, and I guess somebody not burning our tax dollars. Somebody not wasting. Those are the kind of three things that we demand of democracy. We don't necessarily, as a people, say, I want to be voting on every single piece of legislation. Direct democracy. That's not what we're about. We are about accountability, representation, and efficiency of tax uses, I guess, for want of a better expression. And so what my book tries to do is to surface those weaknesses in the accountability, or what I actually think is almost a complete lack of accountability, really. The poor representation and the incredible waste of tax dollars, which seem to have almost no consequence. I mean, you can waste $1 billion and still keep your job, which is like, you know what, dude? I mean, that takes some doing. You've got so many projects in government across the Western democracies which are consistently late or over budget, yet the people who run them don't seem to be affected 1 cent. So you take those three kind of buckets and say, okay, how do we improve each? And one of the things that I think any entrepreneur will tell you is that a small tweak can have a massive impact. You don't have to burn the house down. And I know that there are a lot of people out there who simply love the idea of tearing up the fabric of our democracy from head to toe and saying, right, you know what, we're going to burn it all down and start from fresh. And I think A, that's completely impractical, and B, it's incredibly dangerous. And so what I've tried to do is to administer kind of tactical level changes, such as term limits, such as donation limits, such as, this mechanism of sharing timetables or agendas on screen. So you introduce a bunch of nuances, and if you introduce enough of them, you really get quite significantly towards a meaningful democracy where the system revolves around the people, as opposed to the people being almost treated as some kind of football or some kind of game, which politicians have to navigate. And that doesn't even speak to the 99.5% of our government, which is exempt from any kind of electoral process or oversight.
So when we're talking about the 99.5%, are we talking about people that work for the government? Or are we talking about people that are appointed to the government?
Both. We're talking about anybody who is part of what is supposed to be our people rule.
Yeah, so it's funny. So you don't know this about me, but my business that I just left, and I spent 20 years in the mortgage industry here in the United States. The last 10 years, I specialized in government insured mortgages. So these are the FHA here in the United States. We call it Federal Housing Authority. Does their whole charter is around helping build home ownership in the United States. Mm-hmm. And so my company was I think we were the 11th largest government lender in the whole United States of America. And so we specialized in those types of loans. Here they have Veterans Administration, and then there's a group called USDA loans. So those are like farm loans. So it's a significant amount of lending. It's 30% of all the lending in the United States. So the reason I tell you that is we have to interact with the government a lot. Like as much as you possibly could, because they were the person that was handling all the business we were doing. They were a big partner for us. And I noticed a lot of things about working with the government. A, it's super inefficient. B, people are jockeying to keep their positions. You had two different groups in there. You had so we'll use for example at FHA, the head of FHA is part of what's called HUD here in the United States, the Department of Housing and Urban Development. So when Trump came into office, he appointed Dr. Ben Carson, into the position. This is a neurosurgeon who ran for president, who then became the head of housing for the entire United States. So if it was a private company, he probably wouldn't got that job, because you would never hire a doctor to run a housing, run all the housing for the United States. But he did, and he didn't know anything about housing. So you had a group of people in there that these were employees who were appointees. There was employees and there was appointees who had been part of the previous administration. Every single one of those appointees lost their jobs when the new administration came in. So I didn't know this happened, by the way, because it was the first time I had been doing those types of loans and I had started doing those loans in 2010. And in 2016 was when Obama left off, or 17 was when Obama left office, and 17 was when Trump came in. In the United States, 50% of the people in those positions left because the administration changed over and it was a new administration from a different party. Then the remaining people who are employees either decided to leave or stuck around. And I was baffled by this. I said, oh my gosh, this would be like me owning a company and a new CEO comes in and they get rid of the entire staff and they bring a new staff in, more or less. You can't tell me that doesn't create A, inefficiency, B, a waste of tax dollars, and C, a ton of chaos, which is exactly what it did. The last thing I noticed was that the intellectual efficiency you gain by having experienced people who have been in an organization for a long period of time, when you purge the organization of those people all at once, which is how this happens here in the United States, you purge all that intellectual capital. And so I agree with you. I believe that the incentive systems are fully broken, and that those who are appointed are probably a minority of the problem. The system itself, because what I described had nothing to do with Ben Carson was the one guy that got appointed. It's all the people that came under him those guys didn't get appointed by President of the United States. These were people that were just part of the Republican Party. They got brought in. They took over people who were Democrats before. So I do think that there's an issue around, at least here in the States, and I know in Canada, you guys have a lot more political parties. So I don't know if that's good or bad. So my question for you is, if that's what's happening here, when you have two strong political parties, and you look at a place like Canada where there's way more political parties, is that a better situation or a worse situation? Or is it a lot of the same that I'm describing, just you have different parties who are being represented in the process?
I think you have the same problem across Western democracies, with the political appointees being flushed out at every change of government. That's not unique to the US. I think the thing that's worth flagging within all of that is that in the US federal government, for instance, after the probationary period is over, 1 in 400 employees is fired per year for poor performance.
Right.
In the private sector, it's about 1 in 120, 1 in 130. So the private sector is, generally speaking, way faster at removing underperformance. And the reason that matters is the people who are funding those employees are not all multi-billionaires. I mean, taxpayers include people who are homeless. People don't realize that the person who's homeless, or the 1 in 8 American who's living in poverty, they still pay taxes, sales taxes, when they buy their essential items. They still contribute taxes. And so, you not only have the challenge around the flushing out of political appointees, which happens en masse, but you have the reverse challenge as well, which is that the kind of full-time civil service doesn't move. It's a lifer system, 9 to 5, with incredibly strong pension packages, with incredibly strong unions typically backing them to the hilt. And certainly in Canada, it's close to impossible to be fired if you're unionized and you're underperforming. And so that's a travesty, because people like you and me, ordinary citizens, have to pay for that. And we haven't even touched upon the fact that highly capable talent delivers several times the return than does average talent. So you can imagine that if you are just recruiting and retaining, suboptimal talent, or like below average talent, and that's really your bedrock, then what kind of smart, capable, kind of ambitious person is going to join that culture? And what does that mean for the entire cultural fabric of government? It's dead. I mean, if you want a great example of one foot in the zombie universe, you put one, you kind of walk into any municipal office, the energy levels are somewhere between ground and 6 feet under. Everything has kind of just taken a very different kind of, whenever I walk into government offices, I kind of feel, what happened to the energy here? Like, everybody is sedate. Everybody checks out at 5:01 p.m. There's a coffee break, which is unionized. You can't take that coffee break. And so you've got to wonder, who's paying for this? Somebody's paying for this.
Right. And so you just made a great point, which is the culture of, and I don't remember what the number is, but in the United States, if you compare government jobs to like private sector, it's a huge number, right? Of the percentage of jobs that are either government or government contract jobs, huge number and a huge percentage. And so to your point, and this goes to this idea around what are the values? Like in my book that I wrote, it's called the core value equation. It's all about how do you create a high performance organization by leveraging values to become the language of the organization. And if you look at the most highest performing teams, governments, countries, they always have a culture of performance, right? And that culture of performance comes from the expectation, the behavioral expectations, and leadership elevating everyone to those levels of expectation. And so my question for you is this a values issue? Because it sounds like I think that's an element of it, but it sounds like besides it being systemic, that it's a cultural and a values issue that has somehow been baked into what we now call our government that maybe didn't exist before. Because when you're saying all this, my question then also is, besides, is it a values and a cultural issue, which you clearly have said it's a cultural issue. My question is it a values issue? Well, when was it different? Because I don't know. It just seems like it's gone from bad to worse in my lifetime. I never felt like it was ever great. So yeah, do you think this is a values issue is the first question? And secondly, when was it good? Because if we want to fix it, we got to bring it back to some better standing than it is today.
I mean, I see values as a subset within culture. So to your point, to your first question, yes, it is also a values issue because values forms part of the broader cultural framework of an organization. And with respect to the second question, I think, I'm not really, I'm much more agnostic on that, I think, to be honest. I think part of me thinks that, we probably have a better democracy and a better performing democracy than we've ever had. But yet we are way more aware of information because of the internet, because of the dot-com boom, because of that connectivity. We are just way more aware of what's happening and we are able to connect dots. So I'm open to the argument that oddly enough, our democracies are better than they were 50 years ago in terms of accountability, representation, and efficiency. But we are now so much more aware of the fault lines in that representation, the fault lines in the accountability, and the waste of money that and also the lies actually that we're told. I mean, politicians, it was harder to call out a politician's lies 50 years ago than it is today. I mean, the Toronto Star is running an everyday analysis of Donald Trump's public announcements, and I think they're about 8.4 or 8.7 lies per day from the US president. So we are way more aware of what's going on. And because of that, our faith in democracy has collapsed. It really has. And this is something that government kind of doesn't seem to be interested in. It's like across Western democracies, ballpark 1 in 6, 1 in 7 people trust their federal government.
So, and do you have data on what the trust levels were, call it 30, 40, 50 years ago? How much has
1966, I think, or 64 in the US, it was about 75%.
Wow. So it's interesting to hear what you're saying, essentially, is that we have a better run democracy than we've ever had. But at the same time, we also have much more transparency and awareness around what that democracy is compared to what we thought it was. And because of that, even though it was ran poor, there was probably way more shady things happening 50 years ago than they are today. But it was in a totally analog world with no transparency, no awareness, no information. And so everyone was just asleep at the wheel. And 3 out of 4 people at that point loved their government, trusted their lies. And now they're awake and they say, no, we don't trust anything, but it's still better than it was then. So this is really more or less a perception issue. And now it is a real issue in how the business is being run. And seems like there's a tremendous amount of improvement that needs to be had, but nothing's changed. In fact, what you were saying is you believe it's even ran better. And let's just assume that's true. Let's just say, for sake of argument, it is, because I think you're right. I said this to somebody. I said, hey, I have a question. Is it me, or are more people being killed by police now than before? I'm pretty sure less people are being killed now by police than before. We just see all of them when it happens.
On your iPhones and your Samsung devices.
Yeah, when we have these devices, you couldn't videotape them.
Right. I'm surprised you still have them on your desk, but there you go. Yeah, you're quite right. We couldn't videotape, and now we just do it instantaneously.
Right. So every citizen in the entire country, more or less, not all, but probably 70, 80% of them are carrying around video, like miniatures, studios in their pocket, you know, and capturing all these different things. And now not only that, before, I mean, when you and I were growing up, if I wanted to go look at an old newspaper, I had to go to the library. I had to pull up microfiche tape, which I don't know if you remember what that is. They'd have these little tapes that you'd run through, and you'd have to you could pull up anything you want, but it was a pain in the ass to look it up. So people were asleep. They didn't do it. Now I can look up on any article I want in the last 20 years. And I don't even have to know where it was. I just have to know the name of the person that was in it. Right. And it gets pulled up. So to your point, there's a massive change in transparency, and that's driving this. I have a question. A question just came from the audience, so I want to ask it, and then I want to come back to what we're talking about. The question is, what do you think needs to happen for our faith in democracy to be restored?
I think the very first thing is for government to come to terms with the fact that our faith in democracy has collapsed. I think it's not part of our political agenda. It doesn't surface. If 85% of my shareholders had lost faith in me, that would be a serious management problem. But it doesn't seem to create alarm bells in government. And I think that's the thing that we need to begin to push quite hard and remind our elected representatives that, have you thought about why, 75, 80, 85% of us don't trust you? We actually just don't trust what you're saying. So you could say whatever you want, and you could have all the data to back it up, but the way things are, we just don't trust you. Have you ever thought about why, how, that I think is quite an important piece, because without that recognition, there's not a lot that you can do about it. There's not a lot that the government is going to do. I think the other kind of angle, which I'm slightly hopeful about, is that given the connectivity of the internet, that enough people will connect on the internet to make more of a force of this issue. And you kind of see scattered organizations out there, particularly in the US, which are trying to encourage a more meaningful democracy. And my hope is that movement picks up speed. I'm not quite sure how it will pick up speed, but given the political tensions in the US, which I think will probably get a whole lot worse in the next 2 or 3 months with the election, I think that there could well be a spark that forces people to say, yeah, you know what, where are we? What the heck is going on here? Because, if 4 out of 5 of us just don't trust the guy who's talking on the pulpit because he's part of the federal government, then why are we giving him 40% of our taxes?
Yeah.
Wait, 40% of our incomes.
Right. No, it's top of the income, right? So obviously the will, in a democracy, the will of the people needs to stand up and demand. And what I'm hearing you say is that we need to demand what we want, and then hold people accountable, elect people that'll do it, and get rid of the people that won't until we get what we want.
It's not as easy though, you see, because in the private sector, you've got your shareholders who knock on the door of board of directors and say, hey, board of directors, these CEO characters and the CEO need to go. Okay, that's how the board of directors. So in a big listed organization, listed company, we have the board of directors that perform the modicum of checking on an ongoing basis with against management. That doesn't exist in government. We have nobody in government who's simply there for us to check for, poor performance or for issues or for massive structural problems. We do have these audit agencies, which are dominated and populated by bookkeepers and auditors, glorified bean counters at some level, whose ability to communicate en masse is practically zero. They come out every year with a 500-page document, font 8, using more legalese and accounting jargon than you could possibly try and decipher. Okay. 99.99% of citizens don't go beyond page 2. So, what goes through my mind is that, okay, the wonderful audit department that's here, and it's got a wonderful publication if you're an accountant and you like reading font 8, but nobody from the consumer side, from the citizen side, is reading it. So why can't the audit agencies start pummeling us with social media advertising? Why can't they? If their job is supposed to be, auditing the government, then why can't they get a budget together for social media and hit us with one new piece of information every single day on how the government is doing in terms of their audit? And why can't they go beyond a simple accounting audit into a more holistic organizational audit? There's a difference between an accounting audit and a broader business organizational audit. So why can't they even go in that direction? So, I kind of come to the realization that the audit agencies that do exist, that are meant to be there for us, are actually not there for us. They're actually just there for the sake of cosmetics. Yes, of course we're accountable. Yes, we have independent, constitutionally verified, blah, blah, blah. But man, you are communicating to nobody. Nobody is interested in what you have to say.
Yeah, I thought when you said 99.99, I said, I think you were off by like 4 or 5 nines. And nobody reads that stuff. I used to get them, and they're impossible to read. And to your point, they're just, it's all, we call it CYA, cover your ass, right? So this is all around CYA. And so what's the fix? How do we fix this? What's obviously you have this book, it's out, it's all around this broken contract. You're trying to educate on what the problem is, and I'm assuming solutions, and I don't want you to give away the book necessarily, but big picture, what's the fix besides a little bit of transparency? How do we fix this very complicated problem in your opinion? Because I'm hearing you say a lot of stuff that sounds like what we do in the private sector.
I think it's for us as citizens to kind of just step back a moment and say, what is democracy? What do we mean by it? Are we really at the center of our political system? Do we feel that this system is for us, run by us? And how do you encourage people whose lives are incredibly busy as it is, who've got responsibilities, who are themselves being pummeled by the internet and social media, because there's always stuff to do, there's always interesting things to start or to look at or to view on YouTube or what have you? How do you get them to develop the bandwidth to kind of reflect upon the political system? I think one of the few positives of COVID, it has been that it's enabled more people to reflect upon a bunch of things which in the regular 9-to-5 grind plus commuting to and from, they kind of struggle to do. And I think my hope, it's really kind of my hope that during this time, during this kind of reset time, more and more citizens are going to look at what is happening. I think certainly in the US, given that things are, in a almost unprecedented situation, I think with the US president, I think the opportunity or the kind of fuel, perhaps is the better word, the fuel to kind of drive deeper and more self-reflective, contemplative thinking is there. And so my book outlines a series of measures that we can advocate for, but none of those advocacies is ever going to take into effect unless people see the difference between a democracy and a system which has a vote every 4 years.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So much to think about.
Friday afternoon, at least.
Yeah, no, it's okay. At least we have the rest of the week to think about it too. But that's so great. Well, Saqib, I'm so grateful to have you on the show. Look, I know the book just came out, and you're out there promoting it, and I'm proud to have you on the show to promote the book, and excited for it to get into people's hands so they can really, have some reflection upon what is the democracy that we demand from our government, because we're getting the democracy we deserve at this point. That's the way I see it. So the book is The Broken Contract. Where can people find it? Where can they find you? Let us know.
Sure. The book's on most online bookstores, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, a few others. And they can find me on my blog, drsq.com, drsq.com, the weekly blog, and I can be contacted there as well.
All right. So we got, you can find the book, Broken Contract, guys, at any of the major online retailers. And if you'd like to connect with our friend here, Saqib, please go to drsq.com. We'll put that in the notes. Guys, what a wonderful day we had. What a great guest. Thank you so much, Saqib. I really appreciate having you here. This has been a great show, and I can't wait to check your book out. This has been really a treat. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. No, thank you very much, Darius. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. Guys, look, we got a big week still ahead of us. We're heading into book launch here. My book comes out 4 weeks from today. So follow me on Facebook at The Real Darius M. You can subscribe on the YouTube channel for The Greatness Machine to see more of these shows. And you can go to my website, www.therealdarius.com, for all the different social channels and to see what's going on. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much, Saqib. Really appreciate it. Great luck. Best of luck on the book. And we're here to support you. And yeah, have a great one.
Thank you. Take care.